He had buried 3 men that morning and was digging a 4th grave when the woman rode into Dry Fork with a bullet in her shoulder and a lie on her lips. That was how it started. That was how everything in this town started. With something broken and something hidden and no one sure which was worse. Marshal Eli Holt set down his shovel and watched her come up the main street alone, sitting straight in the saddle the way people sit when they are trying not to fall. Her horse was a good one, strong and dark, lathered from hard riding. The woman herself was somewhere past 40, dressed for traveling, her coat dark with blood at the left side. She did not stop at the doctor's. She did not stop at the sheriff's office. She rode to the only hotel and tied her horse at the post and walked inside like she had a reservation. Eli watched her go. He had been a marshal for 19 years, long enough to know that people who rode into strange towns with wounds they didn't stop to treat were either running from something or running toward something, and in his experience the difference between those two things was smaller than most people thought. He finished the 4th grave. Then he went to the hotel. Her name, according to the register, was Clara Voss. She had taken the room at the end of the hall and paid in advance for 3 nights with coins she counted out carefully. The hotel keeper, a nervous man named Dunbar who sweated through most conversations, told Eli this with the particular relief of someone who had wanted to say something for an hour. Eli knocked on her door. There was a long pause before it opened. She was taller than he'd expected, with dark hair gone silver at the temples and the kind of eyes that had spent a long time looking at distances. She had changed her coat and wrapped her shoulder herself, tight and competent, though the bandaging showed through the collar of her clean shirt. She looked at Eli's badge without surprise, which told him she had expected this visit. "Marshal," she said. "Ma'am." He held his hat. "You want to tell me how you came by that shoulder?" She considered him for a moment. The way she considered things was different from how most people did it, careful and unhurried, like a woman who had learned that the first answer she gave was the one that mattered most, and so she never gave it carelessly. "Fell from my horse outside of Cutter's Creek," she said. "Rock on the trail." He looked at the bandaging visible at her collar. "That wrapping's been done by someone who knew what they were doing," he said. "You do it yourself?" "I've had practice. With bullet wounds?" She didn't answer. She also didn't look away. Eli put his hat back on. "Dr. Reeves is 2 buildings down," he said. "If it's a fall injury, he can see you tonight. He'll be discreet." She held his gaze. "I appreciate the offer." It wasn't entirely an offer. She understood. He watched her understand it. "I'll visit the doctor," she said. He nodded and moved down the hall and did not tell her what he had already noticed, which was that the blood on her first coat had dried in a pattern inconsistent with a fall and very consistent with a shot fired from behind and to the right. He had been reading blood for 19 years. You could not lie to him with it. He went back to the graveyard and stood for a while in the late afternoon sun and thought about the 4 fresh graves and the woman with silver in her hair and something old and frightened in her eyes that she was working very hard to keep invisible. Dry Fork was a dying town. Eli knew it the way a doctor knows a patient, not by what was said but by what wasn't. 3 of those 4 graves this morning had been men who worked the Aldrich mine, the largest employer left in the county. The mine had been struggling for 2 years. People had been leaving. The men who stayed were the ones who had nowhere else to go or something too heavy to carry out with them. The 4th grave was different. The 4th grave belonged to a man named Silas Penn, who had been a land recorder for the county and who had been found 3 days ago face down in the creek with marks on him that were not consistent with drowning and very consistent with being hit hard enough by someone with reason to hit him that he had not gotten back up. Eli had no witnesses. He had no suspects with names. He had a dead land recorder and a town that had gone quieter than usual, which in a dying town was saying something. He went back to his office and sat with the file on Silas Penn and the new fact of Clara Voss, and he thought about how often in 19 years 2 things that seemed unrelated had turned out to be the same thing wearing different faces. He thought about it for most of the night. She was at the diner at first light. Sitting alone at the end table with coffee and a plate of eggs, she was eating with the focused attention of someone who had not eaten properly in days. Her shoulder was clearly painful, but she managed it without drama, moving carefully, compensating the small adjustments of a person accustomed to working through hurt. Eli took the table across the room and ordered coffee and read the same paragraph of the same newspaper 4 times without taking in a word of it. "You can sit here if you're going to watch me anyway," she said, without looking up from her eggs. He folded the newspaper and crossed the room and sat across from her. She looked up. In the morning light, with the fear slightly less visible, she was striking in the specific way of people who have been through enough that what's left is entirely real. No softness in it that wasn't earned. No hardness either that didn't have a reason. "How's the shoulder?" he said. "Dr. Reeves says another week and I'll have use of it." She picked up her coffee. "He also says you've been marshal here since before the town had a proper jail. 19 years. That's a long time to stay somewhere." "It is." She looked at him steadily. "Most men with your record would have moved on to a bigger town by now. More money. More recognition." Eli looked at his coffee. "Most men with my record moved on and found out recognition doesn't hold you when it's cold." He glanced up. "You've been asking about me. I like to know who I'm talking to. Then you have the advantage." He set down his cup. "Because I only know what you told me, which is that your name is Clara Voss and you fell from your horse." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands were wrapped around her cup and she was looking at the table, and she had the expression of a woman standing at the edge of a decision she had been approaching for a long time. "My name is Clara Voss," she said finally. "That part is true." He waited. "I came to Dry Fork because of Silas Penn," she said. The air in the room changed. Eli sat very still. "I read the notice in the territorial paper," she said. "Land recorder killed outside Cutter's Creek." She looked up. "His name wasn't always Penn." She paused. "He was my brother." Eli looked at her for a long time. "Your brother changed his name. 20 years ago." She set down her cup. "We changed them together, she and her brother. After their father's situation made the family name a liability in 3 territories." She said it plainly, not with shame, just information. "Our father was not a careful man. He did things that put his name on certain lists. When he died, Silas and I changed ours and went different directions. It seemed safer." "And you've been in contact all this time?" "Letters," she said. "Careful ones. Through a postal stop in Santa Fe that we both trusted. He wrote to me 6 weeks ago." She reached into her coat with her good arm and produced a folded letter, worn at the creases, read many times. He said he had found something in the county records. Something that was being hidden. She did not hand over the letter, but she held it where he could see it. He said he was frightened and that he was going to write down what he knew and get it to a safe place. She refolded it and put it away. 3 weeks later I read the notice in the paper. Eli breathed slowly through his nose. "What did he find in the records?" "I don't know exactly. The letter didn't say. He was careful about that in case it was intercepted." She met his eyes. "But I know what his job was. He recorded land deeds, property transfers, mining claims." She let that sit between them. "And I know that the man who owns most of this county now is named Gerald Aldrich." Eli knew the name. Everyone in Dry Fork knew the name. Gerald Aldrich owned the mine and the land around it and the water rights to the creek and 2 of the 3 saloons and a significant portion of the town's debt. He was 60 years old and powerful in the way of men who had never once been told no by anyone they could not buy, which meant the telling no that occasionally happened came from men like Eli, and Gerald Aldrich had been working methodically for 3 years to remove that particular inconvenience. "He's tried to have you replaced," Clara said. "Twice," Eli agreed. "County Commission voted against it both times." He looked at her. "The 3rd attempt is pending." She nodded slowly. "Silas wrote about you," she said. "In the last letter. He said there was one man in the county who couldn't be bought and one man who was keeping the record straight and that those 2 things were connected." Eli was quiet. He looked at the table. He thought about a man he had never met dying face down in a creek because he had been careful with numbers that someone else needed to be careless with. He thought about 19 years. "You rode in with a bullet in you," he said. "Where did that happen?" 2 days east of here. The trail through the canyon on the Cutter's Creek Road." She said it without flinching. 2 men. They knew I was coming or they guessed. I don't know which." She looked down. "My horse is faster than they expected. They knew your connection to Silas. If they found out his real name, they could find out mine." She held his gaze. "I'm not hard to find if you know where to look." Eli stood up. He put money on the table for both their coffees. He put on his hat. "I need to look at something," he said. He paused at the edge of the table. Don't leave the hotel until I come back. Not for any reason. He looked at her directly. And don't tell anyone what you told me. Not Dunbar at the desk, not Dr. Reeves, not any person in this town, whatever they say and whatever reason they give. You understand me? She looked at him with those distance-trained eyes. I understand you, Marshal. He went to the records office. It was locked, which it should not have been at 8 in the morning. The new land recorder, a man named Fletch who had been appointed 6 weeks ago after Silas Penn was found dead, was supposed to be at his desk from 7 until noon. Eli had a key to every public building in Dry Fork. He let himself in. The office was neat in the particular way of a place that had been recently organized by someone who was not the person who organized it originally. Drawers lined up. Files stacked without variation. Eli stood in the doorway and looked at the neatness and felt the specific unease of a man who knows that something has been removed from a place by reading the shape of what remains. He went to the deed files for the past 3 years. He was a marshal, not a landman, but 19 years of working alongside people who were and things absorbed through proximity. He knew what a deed was supposed to contain and what it was supposed to cross-reference and what happened when those cross-references did not hold up. He pulled the files for Aldrich Holdings. He spread them on the table. He read. Took him 2 hours. When he was done, he sat with his hands flat on the table and breathed carefully. What Silas Penn had found, or what Eli believed he had found based on the shape of what had been removed from the files and the traces of what remained, was a pattern of land transfers conducted over 8 years that had been recorded in a way that made them appear legal on their face and were not legal in their substance. Families who had sold land to Gerald Aldrich, or who were recorded as having sold it, several of whom Eli knew personally, several of whom had left town confused about what had happened to property they were certain they still owned. A water rights agreement with the county that referenced an original survey that no longer appeared in the files. A mining claim extension that bore a notary seal from a notary who had died 4 years before the document was dated. Silas Penn had found this. Silas Penn had written it down somewhere or was in the process of writing it down, and someone had made sure he did not finish. Eli locked the records office and walked back through Dry Fork in the morning sun and looked at the town he had been living in for 19 years and thought about how long something can be happening underneath the surface of a place before the surface shows it. He thought about the 4 graves. The 3 miners from the Aldrich operation had been recorded as accidents. Eli had not had reason to question that record until now. He was questioning it now. He went back to the hotel. Clara was in her room. She opened the door at his knock and looked at his face and said nothing because his face apparently said enough. He sat down in the chair by the window. She sat on the edge of the bed. He told her what he had found. He did not soften it. She listened without interrupting, which he had come to expect from her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Did my brother have time to write it down? Did he get it somewhere safe?" "I don't know," Eli said. "But if he did, the question is where. And if he did and it's still there, the question is whether anyone else knows where it is." "He wrote to me about a safe place," she said. She was looking at the window, the distance look back in her eyes. He was careful with that kind of thing. He was always careful. She stopped. She was doing something with her expression, controlling it, the way she had been controlling it since he first knocked on her door, keeping the grief in the place where it lived and not letting it run the rest of her. "He was the only person in the world who knew my real name," she said. "And the postal stop in Santa Fe where the letters went, that's the only place anyone could connect us." Eli looked at her. The postal stop in Santa Fe. He thought about 2 men in a canyon on the Cutters Creek Road who knew she was coming. "Someone went through his things before the county did," he said. She looked at him. "Yes." "And found the Santa Fe address." "Yes." "And sent men ahead." She held his gaze. "They were waiting for me, Marshal. It wasn't a coincidence. They knew my description. They came at me specific, not as a traveler on a road." Eli stood up. He went to the window and looked down at the main street of Dry Fork, at the buildings and the people and the particular texture of a place where he had spent 19 years. He could see the records office from here. He could see Aldrich's main building, the land and loan office, 2 buildings past the diner. He could see the hotel where Gerald Aldrich sometimes sat in the afternoon when he came to town, visible through the front window, a man of 60 in a good coat watching his town. "What are you going to do?" Clara said. He turned from the window. "I'm going to find what your brother hid. If he hid it." He looked at her. "And I need your help to do it." She stood. "Tell me what you need." He thought for a moment. "Letters between the two of you. You said he was careful. He would have written in a way that meant something to you both and nothing to anyone else. Think about the last letter. The one where he said he was frightened and he was going to get it somewhere safe." She reached into her coat and gave him the letter. He read it. He read it twice. He handed it back. "He wrote about a place," he said. "He said he was going to put it in a safe place." Those words. Safe place. She looked at the letter again. She was quiet for a moment. Then something changed in her expression, small and fast, and she looked up. "We had a word," she said slowly. "When we were children. When we needed to tell each other something that no one else should understand." She stopped. "It was our grandmother's name. We called her Safety instead of her real name because she was the person who protected us when things at home were bad." She looked at the letter again. "He says he's going to send it to a safe place." She turned the letter over. She ran her finger along the edge where the paper was sealed. He pressed his thumb here. She touched a small mark in the wax. "That's a thumbprint. He always did that when the letter was private." She looked up. "And our grandmother's name was Edith." Eli was very still. "The church," she said. Her voice had gone quiet. "When we were children in a town like this one, safe meant church. It was where our grandmother took us." She held his gaze. "Is there a church here?" "Old one on the hill," he said. "Been there 40 years. Congregation moved to the new building 3 years ago. The old one's empty." She was already reaching for her coat. He put his hand up. "Not together. Not now. In broad daylight with Aldridge's men watching this hotel." He said it steadily. "Tonight. After dark." She looked at him. Then she sat back down. Her shoulder was hurting. He could see it in the set of her jaw. She didn't mention it. "How many men does he have?" she said. "In town regularly 6 or 8. He can bring more from the mine." He paused. "I have a deputy named Cole who I trust with my life. And I have a man named Jasper who rides for the county sheriff 2 days east who I have sent for. He should arrive tomorrow morning if he rides hard. So tonight it's 2 of you." "Tonight it's 2 of us," he agreed. "And you stay here." She looked at him. "I mean it, Clara." She looked at him with those level eyes and he could see very clearly that she was not a woman who had spent her life being kept in rooms for her own safety, and he could see equally clearly that she was going to agree with him anyway because she understood the logic of it, not because she had been told to. "All right," she said. "Tonight. 2 of you." She paused. "And if you find it?" "If I find it, I ride for the county seat myself in the morning with your brother's testimony in my hand and a federal wire already sent to Jasper's office." He held her gaze. "Aldridge can buy a county judge. He has. He cannot buy a federal inquiry." She nodded once. He went to find Cole. His deputy was 24 years old and had been with him for 2 years and was the kind of young man who did not fill silence with noise, which was the quality Eli valued most in a partner. Cole listened to everything without asking questions that weren't necessary, and at the end he said, "So we think the documents are in the old church on the hill. And we think Aldridge has people watching the hotel." "We think both those things," Eli agreed. "Then they'll be watching the hotel tonight. Which means they'll know if the woman moves. And they may decide she needs to move before we can get back with whatever Silas hid." "That's the thing I'm worried about," Eli said. He thought for a moment. "I want you at the hotel," he said. "Not in the lobby. On the roof of the building across the street. With your rifle." He paused. "I need someone between her and whatever they decide to do." Cole nodded. "And you go to the church alone?" "I go to the church alone." Cole looked at him for a moment with the steady look of a young man measuring something. "You've been marshal here for 19 years, he said. "You've turned down 3 transfers and 2 promotions and stayed in a town that's been dying the whole time you've been in it." He paused. "Why?" Eli looked at the wall. He thought about how to answer that. He thought about the 4 graves and the dead land recorder and a woman who had ridden 2 days with a bullet in her shoulder to find out what happened to the only person who knew her real name. "Because someone has to," he said. "And it might as well be the person who knows where everything is buried." He stood up. Get to the hotel before dark. Don't let her see you if you can help it. She'll want to come herself if she knows you're there." Cole almost smiled. He was careful about almost smiling around Eli, who he had noticed did not do it much. "I'll be on the roof," he said. Eli went home and ate a meal he didn't taste and cleaned his rifle in the way you clean a thing you might need, and thought about Silas Penn, who had been careful with numbers and careful with people and careful with everything and had still ended up in the creek. Carefulness, Eli had learned, was not the same as safety. It only improved your odds. You did the careful things not because they guaranteed the outcome you wanted, but because they were the only honest response to a world that was going to be difficult regardless. You were careful because it was right, not because it always worked. He waited until 2 hours after dark. The town was quiet in the specific way it went quiet when the weather was cold and the saloons were slow and the men who were awake because they had reasons to be. Eli moved along the back of the buildings on the north side of the street, staying out of the light from windows, moving in the particular unhurried way he had learned in the years before he was a marshal, the years nobody in Dry Fork knew much about. The old church was at the top of a short rise on the north end of town, 40 yards from the nearest building. It had been a good church once, solid construction, the kind of building that outlasted the community that built it. The windows were dark. The door was unlocked, which meant either no one had bothered or someone had been here before him and not bothered to lock up after. He stood outside it for 2 full minutes, watching, listening. Nothing moved. He went in. It was cold inside and smelled of old wood and dust and something faintly sweet he could not identify. Moonlight came through the uncovered windows in long gray bars across the floor. The pews were still there, pushed to the walls to make space that had never been used for anything else. At the front, where an altar had been, there was a plain wooden table and behind it a cross nailed to the wall, the kind made of 2 boards, simple and direct. Eli stood in the middle of the empty church and thought about where a man would hide something in a place like this. A man who had grown up going to churches like this one. A man who had a grandmother named Edith who had protected him and his sister when their father could not be depended upon. A man who, when he needed to name a safe place in a letter, had used the word their grandmother had stood for. Not under the floorboards. Too obvious. Not in the walls. Too permanent. Not in the pews. Too exposed. He went to the altar. He went behind the table and looked at the cross on the wall. It had been nailed with 4 nails, 1 at each end of the crosspiece and 2 at the bottom of the upright. But one of the nails at the top of the upright was new. He could see it in the moonlight, slightly shinier than the others, the wood around it without the gray settling of age. He pulled the cross carefully from the wall. Behind it, nailed flat to the boards, was a folded oilskin packet secured with waxed cord. He held it for a moment without opening it. Then he tucked it inside his coat and turned to leave. The man was standing in the doorway. He was one of the men Eli recognized as regularly employed by Aldridge, a wide, flat-faced man named Dorn who had come to town about 2 years ago, and who Eli had never been able to connect to anything specific enough to act on. He was holding a gun. He did not look surprised to see Eli. He looked like a man who had been patient for a long time and had arrived at the conclusion of that patience. "I'll take what you found," Dorn said. Eli stood in the dark interior of the empty church with his hands at his sides and thought very quickly about the geometry of the situation. Dorn was 10 feet away. He had the gun up. The door was behind him. There was no other exit. "Put it on the table," Dorn said, "and I'll let you walk out." Eli had been lied to in this room and in rooms like it for 19 years. He knew what a lie sounded like from the particular quality of the silence that surrounded it. "Mr. Aldridge sent you," he said. Dorn did not answer. "Your employer is operating under the impression," Eli said, "that removing me and removing this packet solves his problem." He kept his voice even. He spoke the way he always spoke, without heat, with the patience of a man who is prepared to wait for the right moment even in a moment that did not appear to have one. "I'd like to tell you why he is wrong about that." "I don't need a speech," Dorn said. "You do," Eli said, "actually." He kept his eyes on the man and his hands still. "Because the woman in the hotel, the one your people tried to shoot on the Cutters Creek Road, she wrote a letter this afternoon." He said it without pause. "She wrote it to the county sheriff and to a federal contact, and she posted it through Dunbar at the hotel before you could have known to stop it." He paused. In that letter she describes everything she told me and everything she knew before she arrived here. The letter is already moving. Whether I walk out of this church or not, what's in that packet and what's in her head is already past the point where any of this helps Mr. Aldridge. The darkness in the room was thick between them. Dorn's gun did not waver. But something in his face did, just slightly, the way a thing wavers when it touches the edge of doubt, and doubt is heavy. "You're lying," he said. "I'm a marshal," Eli said. "I have been a marshal for 19 years in this town, and in all those years there is not one person living or dead who will tell you that I lied to protect myself." He held the man's gaze. "I have walked away from things that would have been easier to lie about. I have put men I respected in a jail because the law said to. I have not lied for my own benefit once." He let a moment pass. "I'm not lying now." Another silence. Dorn was thinking. Eli could see it. He was a man in employment, not a man with convictions, and men in employment do a calculation when the thing they were employed to do becomes uncertain. The calculation is always the same. "What happens to me if this goes wrong?" "The packet," Eli said quietly, "in the long run is better for you to let me have than not. If Aldridge goes down for what he's done, you walk away. You were a hand. Hands don't go to prison for their employers." He paused. "If you shoot a marshal over a dead man's papers, you don't walk away from anything. Ever." Dorn lowered the gun 3 inches. Eli walked forward. He walked toward the door, toward the man, slowly, and he put his hand on the door frame and he looked at Dorn from 2 feet away, close enough to see the specific quality of the decision being made. "Go home," Eli said quietly. "Let this end the way it ends." Dorn stepped aside. Eli walked out of the church into the cold Montana night with the oilskin packet inside his coat and did not hurry. Not because he was not afraid, but because 19 years had taught him that hurrying in the wrong moment cost more than the time it saved. He was halfway down the rise when he heard Dorn's horse moving away to the north in the dark. He breathed. He went back to the hotel. Cole was on the roof. Eli looked up and Cole made a small sign with his hand that meant nothing had moved on the street. Eli went inside and up the stairs and knocked on Clara's door. She answered in her coat. She had not gone to sleep. He held up the oilskin packet. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at his face. Then she stepped back and let him in and closed the door. They opened it together on the small table by the window. What was inside was 38 pages of Silas Penn's handwriting. Small, neat, precise. Dates, names, deed numbers, transfer records with discrepancies noted in the margins. Survey references that pointed to records that had been removed. 3 signed witness statements from men who had, according to the statements, been present when certain transactions were conducted and could speak to the manner in which signatures had been obtained. And at the front, a single page addressed to no one in particular, which read as follows. "I am a land recorder. My job is to make sure the record is accurate, because the record is the only thing standing between what actually happened and what someone powerful wishes had happened. I have seen the record manipulated in ways that have taken land from families who earned it, water from a town that needs it, and a fair wage from men who cannot afford to lose it. I have recorded these findings because recording things accurately is the only thing I know how to do well, and the only gift I have to offer to a place that deserves better than what it has been given. My name is Silas Voss. I changed it 20 years ago for reasons that were not shameful but were necessary. The name I changed it to was Penn, which was our grandmother's family name. She was a woman who believed that the truth, plainly stated, was the best protection available against people who preferred otherwise. I have tried to live accordingly. If this is found and acted upon, I am either unable to act upon it myself or unwilling to trust that I can do so safely. Either way, I ask only that the person who finds this treat the record with the respect it deserves." Clara read it twice. She did not let the grief run the rest of her. She folded the page carefully and put it separate from the others and held it with both hands on the table. "He believed in the record," she said quietly. "He always did. Even when we were children and our father was doing things that should have been recorded and weren't, Silas believed that if you wrote it down correctly it would matter eventually." She looked at the pages. He was right. Eli looked at the window. Outside, Dry Fork was dark and quiet. Somewhere to the north, a man named Dorn was riding away from a decision that had saved his life and might cost him employment. and was probably thinking about which of those things was worth more. "I'll go to the county seat tomorrow," Eli said. "With Cole and with you if you're willing to ride." He paused. "Jasper should be arriving in the morning. He'll come with us. For people is better than two." She looked up. "And Aldridge?" "He'll be in his land office at 8 in the morning, same as always." Eli looked at her. "I'll go there before I leave town. I'll tell him what's been found and that it's already past him, and that his best option is to stop moving men around on roads and in churches and let the law proceed." He paused. "He may not listen. Men like him usually don't, right up until the moment they have to." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You stayed here for 19 years. In a town like this, with a man like that operating the whole time." Eli thought about how to answer. He thought about the night and the empty church and the 38 pages of Silas Penn's careful handwriting. "I stayed because the record needed keeping," he said finally. "Someone has to stand in the place where the record is made and make sure it's accurate." He looked at her. "Your brother knew that. That's why he stayed too." He paused. "Not because it's safe. Not because it's comfortable. Because if the people who care about what's true leave, then the only people left are the ones who need it not to be." She held his gaze for a long moment. "That's the moral of it, isn't it?" she said. Not a question. She folded her hands on top of her brother's pages. "That's the thing he was trying to say." Eli nodded. "Simple as it is," he said. "The record matters. The truth matters. Not because it always wins immediately. Not because it saves everyone." He paused. "Because it's the only thing that can win eventually. Everything else is just delay." She looked at the pages. "I'm gonna ride with you tomorrow," she said. Her voice was steady. "I want to see it through. For him." He stood. He put on his hat. "Get some rest," he said. "We leave at first light." She looked up one more time as he reached the door. "Marshal," she said. He stopped. "Thank you. Not for the rescue," she said. "For treating it seriously. His life and what he found and what it meant. A lot of men would have looked at a dead land recorder with a changed name in a dying town and found reasons to close the file." Eli thought about Silas Penn's handwriting. Small, neat, precise. A man who had believed all his life that accuracy was a form of courage. "Some things shouldn't be closed," he said. He opened the door. "That's the whole argument, right there." He went down the hall and out into the Dry Fork night. Morning came cold and sharp, the kind that clarifies things. Gerald Aldridge listened to Eli in the land office with the particular stillness of a man who understood immediately what he was being told and was spending the duration of the conversation calculating the distance between where he was and where this was going. He was 60 years old, and he had been powerful for most of those years, and power had given him the belief that problems were solvable if you applied sufficient resource to them. He looked at Eli across the desk and applied that belief to this problem for about 3 minutes. Then he stopped applying it. Eli watched him stop. He watched the calculation close down and something quieter and more honest take its place. The specific expression of a man who has run out of moves and knows it. "How many people have copies?" Aldridge said. "Enough," Eli said. "More by tomorrow." Aldridge looked out the window at his town. He had built a good portion of what was visible from that window. Eli did not doubt that he believed in his version of what he had built, the version where it was legitimate and earned in his. Men like Gerald Aldridge, Eli had found, rarely thought of themselves as thieves. They thought of themselves as men who understood how the world worked and had been willing to act on that understanding when others were too squeamish. They thought the people they took from were simply less capable, and that capability justified what they took. "The families," Eli said. "The ones whose land was recorded incorrectly." He kept his voice even. "There are ways to address that. Compensation. Restitution. It doesn't undo what happened, but it establishes good faith with the inquiry." He paused. "That distinction matters." Aldridge was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've been waiting for this for a long time." "I've been waiting for the record to be complete," Eli said. "That's all." Aldridge looked at him. "I had you removed twice." "You tried," Eli agreed. "It didn't work." Aldridge said it without satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. "No," Eli said. "Why do you stay?" the older man said. "In a place like this." It wasn't entirely hostile. It was the question of a man genuinely trying to understand something. Eli put on his hat. Because it's my place, he said. He said it simply, without decoration. And because what happens here matters, even when nobody outside of here is watching. He moved toward the door. Especially then. He left Aldridge with that. Jasper arrived at the North Road at the same hour, 2 deputies behind him, having ridden through the night when Cole's wire reached him. He was a tall, quiet man with a federal appointment and a history with Eli going back 12 years, and he read 38 pages of Silas Penn's handwriting standing in the street outside the hotel with the morning sun on the pages, and his expression did not change until he reached the last page, the one with the grandmother's name in it, and then it changed just slightly. "Good man," he said. "To do this alone." He had help, Clara said from beside Eli. He just didn't know it. Jasper looked at her. Then he looked at Eli. Then he looked at the town of Dry Fork around them, the buildings and the people and the particular texture of a place that was about to become different from what it had been. "Let's ride," he said. They rode for the county seat in the late morning light, 5 of them, with Silas Penn's 38 pages secure in a locked dispatch case on Jasper's saddle, and the sky above the Montana hills wide and cold and entirely indifferent to human arrangements, which Eli had always found appropriate. Clara rode beside him for a time without speaking. Then she said, "He'll go to prison." "Aldridge." "Probably," Eli said. "Some of it. Some of it will be civil. The land transfers. The restitution." He thought for a moment. "The men who died, the miners, that will be harder to prove. But the land fraud is clear and the records are solid." She nodded. She was looking at the trail ahead. "What will you do?" he said. "After." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been moving for 20 years, she said. "Different towns. Different names. I moved because my father's trouble required it, and then because I was accustomed to moving and it seemed safer than stopping." She paused. Silas stopped. He put down roots. He cared about the record of one specific place and he stayed to keep it. She looked at the hills. "I think I've been wrong to keep moving. I think he knew something I didn't." Eli thought about what it meant to stay in a place. The weight of it and the gift of it, the way a place accumulated in you and you in it over years, until the question of why you stayed became indistinguishable from the question of who you were. "Takes a while to find the right place," he said. She looked at him sideways. "How did you know Dry Fork was yours?" He thought about the 4 graves and the empty church and the oilskin packet and a dead man's handwriting that had been careful and correct right up to the end. "I knew it was the place where someone needed to stay," he said. "And I was there." He paused. "I think that's usually how it works." She rode beside him, and the morning opened ahead of them down the long trail toward the county seat, and the hearing that would last 3 weeks, and the restitution that would take 2 years, and the way Dry Fork changed afterward slowly and without announcement. The way towns change when the thing that was wrong in them is corrected. Not completely. Not all at once. But honestly, in the record, Silas Penn's grave was moved from the county lot to the Dry Fork Cemetery the following spring. Clara arranged it. She had come back to Dry Fork by then, which was something she had not planned and had not announced, and which became permanent in the gradual way of things that were always going to be permanent. She opened a small law practice, working cases that involved land disputes and property records and the particular category of injustice that happens when someone with resources deliberately confuses the paperwork around someone without them. She was good at it. She was, Eli thought, the kind of person who had found the right use for the things that had hurt her, which was the best outcome available to any of them. He visited the grave with her on a Tuesday in April when the hills were coming green and the creek was running well. They stood for a while without talking, which was comfortable between them in the way silence is comfortable between people who have established that they mean well and can be trusted with it. He believed the record mattered, Clara said finally. "That's on the stone." She had chosen the words herself. He believed that writing things down accurately was a form of courage. Eli looked at the stone. He thought it was a good sentence for a man to be remembered by. "Most people go through their lives looking for the big thing," he said. "The dramatic thing. The moment that will mean something." He looked at the hills. "Your brother knew it was the small thing. The right number in the right column. The name spelled correctly. The date that matches the deed." He paused. "Small things kept accurate over time are how the truth survives." She looked at him. "That's what kept you here, isn't it?" she said. "Not the heroics. Not the famous cases. Just the small things kept right year after year." He thought about 19 years. About the people who had stayed and the people who had left and the ones who were still here in the ground on the hill. It adds up, he said. Eventually it adds up to something that holds. The creek ran behind them and the hills went on in every direction the way they had been going on long before there was a town here and would go on long after. And the grave of Silas Voss, who had called himself Penn, who had believed that accuracy was a form of courage, stood on the hillside in the April sun. And the record of what he had done was in a courthouse 2 counties over where it would remain as long as courthouses held records, which was the only kind of permanence available in this world and the only kind he had ever asked for. They walked back down the hill together in the late afternoon light. Dry Fork was not a dying town anymore. It was not a prosperous town either. It was what it had always had the potential to be, an honest town, a place where the record was kept correctly and the land belonged to the people who had earned it and the water ran to everyone who needed it and the graves on the hill held people whose names were their real names. Eli walked into it the way he had walked into it every day for 19 years, without ceremony, without announcement, as a man who had decided that this was the place where he would do what needed doing and had not found a reason to change his mind. Some men spend their whole lives looking for a cause worth staying for. Some find it far away and famous and ringed with recognition. Some find it in a small and dying town in the territory, in the careful handwriting of a man they never met, in the knowledge that the record needed keeping and they were the person standing next to it. The cause was not the glory. The cause was the small daily decision to be the person who told the truth about what had happened, who noted the discrepancy, who did not look away from the number that did not match, who stayed when staying was inconvenient, who held the line when holding it cost something real. Not because it always worked. Not because it guaranteed a good outcome or a long life or the recognition of anyone watching. Because it was right. Because right done quietly and consistently over years was the only thing that eventually, slowly, imperfectly, held. Silas Penn had known that. Clara Voss had ridden 2 days with a bullet in her shoulder because she knew it too. And Eli Holt had stayed in one place for 19 years and dug 4 graves in one morning and kept the record straight and walked into an empty church in the dark because some things, simple as they sound, are worth building your whole life around. The door of the marshal's office opened and closed behind him. The record was accurate. That was enough.